I would just make it difficult for all of us. You know what I mean?
I
So
would just give a big to the whale. You don't want me there.
Moby Dick, I misinterpreted what you were saying.
Hi everyone, instead of my usual angry person looking at the camera and saying bad things to you, I am going to do something slightly different. A couple of days ago, I had the opportunity to interview Devin Townsend for his upcoming album Order of Magnitude, Empath Live Volume 1. And it was just supposed to be 20 minutes. And instead we ended up talking for an hour. And it was a conversation that really went off script. We discussed mental health, the way the pandemic is affecting him, his relationship to his own artwork, as well as to the way in which fans interpret this artwork. And I think it's going to be really interesting for you if you are into, of course, Devin Townsend, but also if you're interested in the way a musician relates to his own work. But don't worry, I will be back very soon being angry about something else and talking at the camera.
I've spent so much time seated during this pandemic that the last chair that I had, dude, it just was rocking my back. I just, and it was a fancy chair too. It was a stupid Herman Miller chair. And it was like I had spent more money on it than I wanted to spend on it. And it was really hurting my back. So I just went to the drugstore and bought this, chair for a 12-year-old. But, it's okay.
No, but it's great. I mean, you're ready to start your streaming channel. And
I already started. I'm on Twitch.
Yeah, I know. I have some questions about Twitch, but I was going to ask if you were like ready to do some Minecraft shit. Maybe get one of those headphones with the little cat ears on them.
What would be funny is if I did do a Twitch stream where I played video games, because I suck at video games. Like, dude, I suck at video games. I don't know what it is about the way video games work and the way my brain works. But, my 12-year-old kid is playing these games, and it's like all you have to do is tap the screen and you jump over a thing, and then you jump over a thing. And I just get stuck every time. First thing, I'm like, pew, pew, pew. I was never good at video games. I liked watching people play them. Like when I saw people play video games, and maybe that's a lot of what Twitch functions as, being able to, the sort of voyeuristic video game experience. But at some point, I think it was when Crash Bandicoot came out, and I was just like, it's too complicated. I don't want to do this anymore. I just want to jump over something and have it go boing, boing, boing.
I think that what has been slightly fascinating for me about that is just to realize that even when I think I'm okay at a video game, I do not have the kind of interest in getting good enough to compete with the 12-year-olds that kick my ass on the internet. So it's like
incentive. It's like, other than money, which I mean, you have to be at such a level to make a living at it that it's not feasible, I wouldn't think. Other than that, like anytime I've put an hour or two into a video game, it's like, oh, you've been awarded a virtual golden cup. And I'm like, really? Dude, there's a couple games over the years that I have enjoyed. Like, there's one called Burnout that I liked, and I think the reason I liked it is because you just held one button and things exploded, and you went really fast, and then it told you were badass. Like that, there was not like a skill game. It was just like explosions and speed, and the computer telling you that your mom loves you or something, right? It's like, but all the other ones, it's like, I go see a friend of mine, and he's my age, and dude, all about it. And he's like, man, this one here, and you have to press this and hold this at the same time, and you get to access the scope. And I'm like, I don't want to do this. Is work at the end of a work day. I don't want to do that.
This absolutely happens to me when I start playing a game and it starts and it gives you like a tutorial, like in order to craft. I don't want to craft shit.
I don't craft anything. The conversation often comes up for me about, do you play video games? And I try and be cautious when I say no, because invariably what happens is people go, well, you just haven't played the right video game. And I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure I don't like video games. And they're like, no, but have you tried, this one and this, and I forget what the one, this guy was like, oh, you got to play this new Red Dead Redemption. And I went and played it for 10 minutes, and the only takeaway from that, I was like, some bored graphic designer spent a certain amount of time making the horse's testicles shrink when it gets cold. That's all I took from it. They're just like, yeah, well, you could go. And I'm like, but I don't want to. None of it, it doesn't interest me.
what I wanted to ask you is that you mentioned at the beginning, you've been sitting quite a bit during the pandemic, which in turn led to your
Racing chair.
badass 12-year-old racing chair. Uh, I want to know how have you been actually? How you, your family, your life in general has been during this utterly chaotic trial run for the apocalypse that is 2020.
How have I been? I am a hybrid of a lot of things. I am well aware of the chaos and the anxiety that it has brought to my life, being surrounded by people who are vulnerable, older. I have kids, having to pivot work, the uncertainty of it all, the political and social discourse that's so toxic. All these things result in a mindset that I could excuse myself for feeling like um, all was lost. However, I don't feel that way. I feel uh, uh, incredibly grateful for things that I maybe have taken for granted in the past. And that has also extended to the audience. Like, I'm so grateful for this career that I have, that I've gone as far as I can to try and make as much content, as much good content, and try and make it something that I can provide with my skill set, something that helps rather than hinders during this period for other people. But it's not easy, like the other day I was working on something, I was putting up a podcast or something, one of the things that I was working with, and while it was printing I just fell asleep. Like, that's just what happens now. I'll just be like, oh, okay, I'll just press record here, and it's got 7 minutes for it to bounce, and then I'll just be like, and I'm out. And I realize that there's this low humming anxiety that has permeated all of our lives, that although I feel very grateful and very able to cope in the ways that I've learned how to, that anxiety in my life is sky high, dude. Like, it's like everybody else. It's weird. It's hard. It's a hard question for me to answer, because all signs point to I should feel the worst that I've ever felt, but I don't. So
Well, that's good. I mean,
yeah,
I know that you've had some struggles with mental health. I have had them as well, so I don't say that as a judgmental
no,
statement
no,
in the
no, I wouldn't
slightest.
take it even if it had been that way.
No, but it absolutely wasn't. So I fully understand that the uncertainty of the times right now does make it difficult. But it is fantastic to know that with the coping mechanisms that you've developed, as well as your work and your family, you are not struggling emotionally or personally. Apparently, with your family seems to be
Well,
okay. So that's a fantastic thing.
I do struggle, but it goes in 3-day cycles. And that's why it's been interesting, because I'll go for 3 days where I'm just like, God, I can't. And then all of a sudden I can. And I think the things that are really important to bring to light in terms of the mental struggles and the fallout of this, which is going to result in a lot of mental illness, I think, is that there's also this faction of society that when you ask them how they're doing during this period, they're quick to say, oh, I've never been doing better. I've been doing great. This is the best I've ever done. And I know there's certain friends of mine that say that. There's a lot of people that say that to me. And I think that they're maybe projecting a little bit, and maybe they're not taking into consideration or being honest with how difficult it actually is. And I think one of the biggest problems with dealing with a society that's coping with these mental issues is when we downplay how intense it is. I think it's okay to be depressed, and I think it's okay to be despondent every now and then, regardless of whether or not you've got any predisposition to mental illness, because this is a depressing and despondent situation for a lot of people. And to allow yourself to feel that, I think, is really important. But also simultaneously to not allow yourself to like get so caught up in that you're wallowing. And the ways that I have found to manage it are meditation and exercise, and the awareness that I'm not alone with this. Everybody's with it. And if that person is able to pull themselves through, then so am I, and that helps.
I want to ask you something because it's connected to the issue of mental health. I was talking with a friend of mine today who I know is a big fan of yours. And I asked her, I'm going to speak with Devin later today. And do you have any questions? And one of the things she said, besides just the normal questions for a musician, was, please tell him that I have been in very difficult times in my life. And his music has helped me pull through. I don't know what songs it was or why it was, but considering your own struggles with mental health issues, I'm sure that the answer is, of course, it feels good and everything, but deeper than that, how does it feel to know that you have been able to touch people in that way?
In a word, humbling. I mean, of course, that's beautiful. But in another way, what it makes me feel is that my intention for making music is to try and translate through my own trip, through my own bias, through my own filter, something that's true. And when I say true, something that is beyond me. And so when people are helped by that, there's a certain amount of legwork that I've done to participate in that help. But I truly feel that if people feel that way, it's because the legwork that I've done has allowed me to tap into something that is, beyond me. And that's a lot of what art is as a function. When I am moved by a piece of music, it's not that I feel like, well, this person is the focus of why that happened. This person was the conduit to something, and it's the thing that they're a conduit to that I'm grateful to recognize in their work. And so when I hear those comments from people, I feel humbled because I feel that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. Because the objective here is not to make people feel worse. And I think that, depending on how deeply invested in your own hangups you are, it's easy, once you have established a skill set over 30 years of doing something, to use your work to make people feel like shit. You know what I mean? Like, I know that with my skill set as a producer or singer or guitar player, I know how to manipulate what I'm doing better than I used to the point where if I really wanted to make something ugly, I can totally do that. And in the past, I experimented with that. I was like, I'm going to make something really ugly. But what happens with that is that's what your world ends up being. You end up being the guy that provides that. And that's totally fine if you can swallow the ramifications of it, which I couldn't. What it brought into my life was just a bunch of people that I'm like, I don't relate to you. My reasons for making that music was not in hindsight because that's where I was at. And well, maybe not that's where I was at, but that's what my soul wanted to sing. It was that I was afraid of a lot of things. I was afraid of being vulnerable. I was afraid of confrontation. I was afraid of anger. I was afraid of being seen as weak. I was being afraid of all these things. And so my skill set ended up being filtered through that. And then what came out of me was music that mirrored that. It's like a defense mechanism. It's like music that wants to keep people away.
What would be an example of your music that did that, just to get a clear example in my mind?
Alien. Yeah. But I'm proud of that record because not only on a technical front, which I'm very proud of it for, but on a personal front, I needed to do that to learn what it would do. I often thought that it doesn't matter what you put out in the world. It doesn't matter, And maybe to some people who are wired differently than I, it doesn't matter. But for me, by putting that out, all of a sudden the people that were interested in it, the people that related to it, were people that I was like, oh, I don't want you in my life right now. Not everybody. There's some people that really, I'm like, oh, we relate because we're dealing with similar things. But there's other people that were like very different from me and viewed the music in a way that I didn't intend it to be viewed. And long story long, my life just ended up being full of this energy that I was incapable psychologically of navigating. because it was so rooted in bravado when I was writing it. I was like, I'll be tougher than everybody. I'll be louder than everybody. I'll be scarier than everybody. And then when I realized at the end, I'm like, well, I'm not that tough and I'm not that scary. I'm just shit scared, you know? So what became very clear to me after that record, and again, I love that record because it was really important to me, is DTP and all the records following it ended up being a way for me to retroactively describe the process. And that's what I use the podcast for now in a lot of ways as well. And it's not because I think that what I do is of such significance that it needs to be dissected in that way. No, it's because your friend. I would much rather know that I have the capability to do a handful of things. So upon experimenting with it, I choose that because it makes more sense to me.
Connected to that idea, since you mentioned that there are people who at the time, for example, in the case of Alien, took your music differently from how you envisioned it or from where you wanted your career to go. You are one of the few musicians out there who I think are considered like it's kind of weird, like real musicians, kind of these people who seem to have this constant impulse to write and write and write. Buckethead would be another example, just this kind of constantly creating musician. So for somebody who creates that much, is it very difficult to know that, particularly when lyrics are involved, you are bound to have the kind of reaction that you mentioned, which is people are going to take what they want to take from there. And it leads you to that question that always exists for people analyzing art, which is how much does the artist's opinion of my interpretation actually matter?
It doesn't. However, for me, I need to be able to rationalize it. I can't do anything about how other people react to it. But if I can't explain myself, then I feel like the capacity that I have to make powerful sound, I'm not um, I'm not respecting it because I am being guided by it as opposed to it being a symbiotic thing where another way to put this would be that my objective in life is to progress as an entity. My objective is not to be the best musician in the world. It's not to be a famous or successful artist. My objective is to progress as a person, and the music is a byproduct of that. So an indicator of my progress or lack thereof is how the music ends up manifesting. And the only person who has a say on that I will listen to is me. Because everybody else, like you say, it's all going to be a part of their experience and their trip. And I've got no desire, nor do I feel that artists have any control over how other people interpret it, nor should they. But if you, as an artist, have a megaphone and you are choosing to put things out, and you know that the way that you're wired causes you a lot of problems if you draw things to your life that you consciously have chosen and that you don't understand, or upon hindsight you realize is incorrect for you, then that's your choice. Because my life is more important to me than whether or not somebody wants to hear more Alien or more Strapping or any. There's a lot of records that I've done that I just think, okay, well, you're finished with that. And what has typically happened with that is when I have this discussion, which I've spent years trying to find the words for, it's a complicated thing to explain. A lot of people interpret my thoughts on this as, oh, well, you regret what you've done, or you don't like what you did with Strapping or whatever. And it's not that at all, because that's exactly where I was at that point. At that state of my psychological development, that was the truth to me. But in order for me to progress, I needed that lesson. I needed to be able to actualize it. The ramifications of it are clear as day. And I'm like, okay, you like this, you don't like this, follow that.
Now, I obviously cannot relate to what it feels as a musician to have people interpret your work differently, but I write quite a bit, and sometimes I do encounter people who interpret it differently. They leave comments to that extent, and I feel this like need to like, no, you got it wrong, and then kind of explain it. Is that a call that, despite your popularity, you also feel that you want to like correct people as to what you meant?
Less now. At one point, yes. Now I feel more just like laying it out on the table, because um, it's not the misinterpretation. It's good for me to even say this out. It's not the misinterpretation that bothers me. It's my inability to refute it. That was the problem. So if somebody said, "Hey, this song that you wrote, I think you meant this." If I hadn't thought it through, I would be like, I didn't, but I don't know what it means. And so now I'm able to say, I can understand how you get that, but this is what it meant to me. And this is the reason why it came out. And it's purely self-serving. I'm not explaining it or trying to correct people on their interpretation of it, because I feel that that's an important part of the work. It's more because what I'm trying to do is help people in the best way that I possibly can with my skill set. And it seems in my experience that being able to describe my process and why I do things can solve some, questions that maybe people who are deeply invested in the music might have had.
But you mentioned helping people. So by that line, am I correct if I understand that when you write music, you're writing thinking about a potential audience necessarily?
No, I think that would be altruistic, which is not really what the function of the work is. It's in the background. I'm just thinking, I write for me, but because I make it commercially available, clearly I have to involve other people. If I was writing entirely for me, and it always strikes me as funny when artists say, I only write for me. And I was like, well, if you do, then you shouldn't release it, because simply by, well, maybe not shouldn't release it, but why are you releasing it rather? Because simply by releasing it, other people participate in it. And I guess I am maybe overly sensitive to, uh, people.
Have
And
you ever read a comment? I'm very sorry for interrupting you.
not at all.
If like maybe you made the grave mistake of reading the YouTube comments under one of your videos or something, or even on Twitch, have you ever read something that a fan said? And of course, if it's just the F word or something like that, it's not so hurtful, but that they actually said something that they thought about and they put it down and you read it and you go like, oh shit, that actually hurt.
Oh, of course. Oh, of course. Oh my God. Yeah, of course. That's why I don't read comments. But what's the interesting part about it is, the rub to that is that you can't read the good things either.
Hmm.
It's like someone, there's people, and specifically as my career has grown, there's people who, professionally go out of their way to try and be cruel to people for whatever reason. And you can spot them, and it sucks. But at the same time, if you read the comments, you're probably going to run into other people saying things so overblown or hyperbolic about your work that's just as bad in a sense, because it's very difficult to do any reliable degree of self-editing if your head is full of, oh, I'm awesome, you know I'm king shit at Turd Island and this guy tells me why, right? I think
But
that,
did that start happening to you as time progressed? Because there is, I mean, of course, there is no debate that you're a technically very, very talented musician, but at the same time, you're also a commercially successful musician within heavy metal or this genre of ours. Well, not successful if we compare it with Taylor Swift, but for the
I
genre,
appreciate
very
that.
successful.
Sure.
So I am certain that um, at some point, whether you like it or not, you will be surrounded by sycophants, people who will be telling you that you are indeed king shit of Third Mountain.
Well, I mean, I look at it this way. I've got a bit of a a good defense against that thus far. I've been married for 30 years, and my closest friends I've had in my life for 30 years, and they couldn't give a fuck. So if I go down an avenue that requires a little bit of, gentle nudging back into reality, I've got a stable full of people that I know are, because of the way that we interact with each other, are just waiting for the opportunity to tell me I'm full of shit, right? So that helps for sure. But I also think that a part and parcel of any progress in any field is getting past the fear of success. And for me, that's been a big part of why I have sort of hovered at this level for as long as I have, because any opportunities that I've been presented to sort of make that next step, I've typically balked at. And I mean, I guess one could claim, I want artistic freedom, or any number of sort of like romantic reasons as to why.
I
But
don't want to sell out, man.
exactly. But I think maybe there's another level that's just like it's comfortable to stay where you are. But I think that going back to what I said a few minutes ago about my goals in life to be rooted, not primarily, but in a large part in personal development, maybe that fear of taking that next step is also something that is an obstruction to any sort of real progress. And with that comes a lot of things like sycophantic behavior from people, or like extremely negative behavior, or things that I wouldn't even be aware of yet would come with that. But at what point do you say to yourself, if my trajectory musically or artistically is inclined to go in a direction that is, got a certain degree of success, should I sabotage that for fear of the unknown? And with that all being said, sycophantic behavior from people are just things that I think you have to learn to navigate. And I've known a lot of people who have had, much more success than I. And I've seen a couple of them that are surrounded by people, and I just think, man, that is really unhealthy. But they are also typically single, and their friends that they have had since their kids are no longer really in their life. They've got a bunch of new people that have a vested interest in this person because they're financially successful, or they can do
Yeah, a
something.
posse. Yeah.
Posse, right? But I've also met people who are really successful that have got a wife and a kid and friends from childhood that keep them in check pretty well. And I like to think that if my career ever went to a slightly more successful degree, that that group of people around me have got me pretty firmly in check still.
Connected to what you just said, would you like to start to climb more in that popularity? Because there is certainly a financial benefit to being much more popular.
If there is, um, my reasons for wanting to do it, other than the practical life parts of it, finances and all that sort of thing, is that as I've managed to accumulate more clout, I guess, as my career has gone on, my work has benefited from that clout. And for the most part, I don't think that I have strayed too far from what I was doing in the very beginning. Even on Ocean Machine or whatever, there's always been a commercial aspect of what I do. Like, I loved Hysteria so much by Def Leppard when I was a kid, or Watermark by Enya, that on Ocean Machine, like Life, it's a pop song. It's not like me incorporating anything that's melodic or commercial now is a ploy to become more successful. I mean, I've always been attracted to that, and I'm fortunate that that's part of my trip. Um, but that being said, I can do, when I do this order of magnitude show, or the Ziltoid show, or now I can get the screens, I can get the puppets, I can have 10 people on stage, I can have this engineer, I can do all these things. And I think I've carved out this unique little niche for myself, where I think people rely on me being creatively free as part of the reason why they're interested in what I do. And so another level of success for me, I'd like to think, would bring more opportunity for me to take these crazy ideas that I have and make them awesome. And I think that sounds great to me, because I fucking hate struggling trying to do projects. I hate it, dude. Like, I'm always, when I'm working on things, I'll get some crazy idea, and there's a certain amount of kitsch to it that's cool. Like, I'm doing a home concert, and this camera, I've got it attached to a blender that's making it move back and forth. There's something, kitschy about that. That's cute, right? But there's another part of me. It's like, I would love to have just like these ideas and these visions that I have, just get the best people possible and make it fucking awesome, right? Like,
what are some of the, if budget constraints weren't an issue, what are some of the things that you have in mind that you would like to see on stage within reality, of course? Like,
oh, well, there's the rub. I don't know if I can answer now. I mean, dude, I'd be a menace. Like I've got this concept for the Moth project. It's this orchestra about how sex and humanity has played so much into our need for power, and how that has resulted in just this horror show that we're in. And I'd love to make a massive venue that's basically inside a womb, that uses projection mapping to create this virtual environment that has this complete surround, with like 1,000-person choir and like hundreds of people in an orchestra, and just, but so crass and so perverse in terms of the imagery, with a punchline on it that is not nihilistic, but somewhere in that category. But to pull it off with such production values would make the punchline that much more powerful. Because if, say, the punchline ultimately is, well, the whole reason for being a human is, you got your friends and family, and every now and then you read a good book, and you maybe get laid every now and then, and you have some food, and I mean, it's like, that's it. So, but in order to make that trip, in order to make that point super poignant, you got to go on a trip. And so I would love to have the production value to make the trip so like, holy fuck, man, what is going on here? So at the end, when that punchline comes around, it's like that much more impactful, right? Like, and I would love to be, what I do find is, as things grow and you run into people, I run into orchestras and conductors and visual artists and screenplay producers and people who do these movies. And most people who do commercial art are bored. They're like, we've got all the budget in the world to make, Spider-Man, swing from that thing to that thing, like unlimited budget with as much sushi as you can eat. You know what I mean? Like the whole commercial side of art, I have always kind of felt is squandered on things that is just kind of not bad, but not interesting to me.
Yeah, no, I understand.
So,
Yeah, because like you see a new Michael Bay film and you think, I understand that there's an audience, but
well, and plus when I see it, I think, my God, that's beautiful. The artistry of that is beautiful. It's so beyond where I'm capable of achieving, because they've got the best gear, the best computers, the best minds. And so the story is just like, well, we have to sell it. So what sells? Well, the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell. So here's that again, except with, orcs or aliens or whatever. It's
Transformers. Yeah, I get it.
Transformers, whatever it is. But when I see it, the story aside, I think, God, the production value of that is so gorgeous, man. I remember when one of the Star Wars movies came out, and I'm in my mid 40s, late 40s now, and so I've got fond memories of Star Wars when I was 8, but I hadn't seen them really. And so the new one came out, and I was like, I'm going to go see it. I don't go to movies. I'll go see Star Wars. And went and sat some stupid chair that like spit water in your face and beat you off halfway through it. It's like the whole thing. Like, it was like
the 4D version. All right.
Yeah, it was something else, right? It was like giving you a cloth, but it's like the chair was awesome, and I'm watching this thing. So here's my takeaway from, I have no fucking idea what that movie was about. I have no idea what it was about, but it looked so beautiful, dude. It was gorgeous. It's like brings tears to my eyes. It was so gorgeous. I have no idea what it was. I wasn't invested in it. It was just on a purely technical level. I was like, that is amazing. And so if I was ever to be graced with the ability to actualize my work at a level of higher, I guess technically, success than where I'm at, that's what's enticing about it.
Would an idea of kind of a musical film in the style of Tommy, for example, be something that you would like to do if it was possible?
Very much. Very much. But I think it's also down to the intent of who you're working with. A lot of times, so when I looked into doing the Moth, I went to Sony in London, and I've got a screenplay writer, and I've got a group of people, and I've got a guy who's a producer for these amazingly successful films. Or not amazingly successful, but successful films that would be willing to help me with it. Oh, it's all good, and I got an orchestrator, and I kind of put together this demo of my idea, and then talking to the orchestrator, talking to the screenplayist. I don't know what the term, playwright, whatever.
Screenwriter, I think it is.
How much would I need to ask Sony for to do this as a Broadway production? They're like, well, you're going to need at least 10 million pounds to do it the way that you want to do it. So I went to Sony in London, and I said, okay, I've got this crazy, I want to turn the venue into a womb, and it's about sex and violence, and it's like super traumatic, and it's got this punchline at the end. Like, oh, it sounds interesting. How much would it cost? I said, it would cost you 10 million. And they're like, yeah, no.
Please remove Mr. Townsend from the office, please. Thank you.
That's kind of how they're just like, so lunch, you know? So yeah, my point with that was, to do it, I would need to have somebody who is running block for the creative aspects of it, so we could go in any direction that we wanted without having to answer to like a board that said, okay, well, we understand that this is your artistic vision, but in order for us to rationalize our investors' investment in this, you're going to need to cut out 30% of the dicks or whatever it is, right? And I think that that would just become really difficult from what I can tell.
I remember speaking a completely different style of music, but with this Finnish band once, Lordi, who they won the Eurovision one, and they made this terrible film, and it's a terrible horror film.
Amazing.
But it's pretty bad. And I was speaking with Lordi himself, and he said, like, yeah, but that's not the film we wanted to make. So regardless of what your opinion of Lordi might be, that's separate. That's not the film they wanted to make. But the studio says, listen, this is what we are going to take to cinemas, because your fans alone are not going to recoup the investment, right?
Exactly. And so, I've had people who have offered me situations that could potentially bring me to another level, but they all seem like they come with it a type of baggage that I'm just not prepared to carry. And one of those is I after I said, oh, it's like, it's these massive vaginas and these, guys that got dicks for crowns, and it's all power, and it's like brutal, and it's like, and they're like, well, why don't you could do like another person's novel. You could do like Moby Dick or something. And I'm like, but then why would you hire me? Dude, you'd find a ton of people who are much more qualified than I to say, oh, this is the whale, and here's, Captain Ahab, and he's got his theme and all this sort of shit. I got people in my life that are willing to help me with this project of mine, that if someone said, hey, we'll give you this opportunity to do Moby Dick the musical, I was like, dude, you should use Nils for sure. He'd tear that up. I would just make it difficult for all of us. You know what I mean? So
I would just give a big dick to the whale. You don't want me there.
Moby Dick. I misinterpreted what you were saying. But it was like, so for me, I got to also be careful of the ways in which success tends to be like presented. Like I was also offered, I've been offered some really strange things, like to be a musical director on this, talk show that was successful, and I was like, I can't do that. But it would have been successful for me. But it's like, it seems enticing up front because it's like money, and I got offered to do this. This producer was going to take my work and fine tune it so it could have the formula, and then we'd get it with the right, and we'd present it like a commercial medal and all this sort of stuff. And I was like, so I went and tried it, And you know, I paid 10 grand to do this song because it's like if we didn't use it, it's like it was going to cost me 10 grand. And when it was done, I listened to it and I was like, fuck no, man. Like that, not only is it not me, it like flies in the face of 30 years of not doing that. But I think selling out is an interesting concept because, as we said earlier, it's very easy to claim, oh, I'm not selling out, when actually I'm just afraid of success or afraid of failure or whatever.
Or
But
it's very easy to say I'm not selling out when nobody's giving you the chance to sell
well,
out.
and also it's easy for me to say I'm not selling out when I listen to the song. I'm like, dude, people are gonna hate this. This is a shitty song. It's like but I was, you know, at the time there's a bunch of people around me that were like, no, man, this is the song. This is going to be the one that does it. And I'm like, guys, this song sucks. You know what I mean? And I wrote it. It's like I wrote it with the guys, but dude, this song sucks. And if I put it out to the audience that I'm with, they're not going to be like, wow, man, you really took the next step. They're going to be like, dude, this fucking song is a dog, man, you know? And because it's got that commercial sheen and it's like the pre-chorus and the rhyme scheme and all this sort of shit that goes into that type of music, it's just a horrible decision, man. So
There is a payoff for that, certainly. I mean, there are, if you go to a Metallica concert now, there are you have the people who discover Metallica with Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets in the audience, but you have a shitload of people who got there from Load, Reload, and even Lulu, right? So that they just showed up for the concert too. So
I think Metallica is a different. I mean, I'd like to think that Metallica is a bit of a different story though, because they still take chances regardless of, you know, dude, Lulu was a hard listen, man. You know what I mean? But but to be at the level that they're at and still do that is, I think, really cool. And even I remember when they did Some Kind of Monster, for me, the Metallica album for me was Ride the Lightning, you know, and Master of Puppets, but Ride the Lightning, it was like, you know, between those two, that was my era for it, right? And Load and all that, I mean, it was a hard one for me, man. You know, I mean, it's like I kind of fell out of love with them there. I like the production on the Black Album. It's like, but um they, I don't think they ever really did
sold
something
out.
yeah, in a weird way. Even though they wrote commercial music, and there was a certain aspect of Load that was, again, like a hard listen, right? Because it sounded uninspired to me. That was my personal opinion of it.
No, it was very radio-y, right? It
It was very
was.
radio, but I don't get the impression that wasn't where they were. You know what I mean? Like I don't get the impression they were like, it was like a market strategy to make a record that was like that. I just think that they had a ton of success. All of a sudden they were all in fancy houses and they're like, oh, I guess that's what we write now. You know? But when Some Kind of Monster came out, I remember there was a bunch of friends of mine, like real dyed-in-the-wool metalheads, that hated that movie. I was like, why? And they said, well, because it made Hetfield look weak. And I'm thinking, yeah, but there's a certain thing I really respect about somebody who can admit that they're not strong, because I think that the byproduct of that is other people recognize that that's not something that you need to be ashamed of. And, you know, with Hetfield going into rehab and again going into rehab, I've found that he's been a really positive influence on a bunch of people. Maybe not the dyed-in-the-wool metalheads, but I get the impression that Hetfield's role has really refined itself to be something that is of real value. And so I don't put Metallica into a sellout category necessarily, although some of the music is
Commercial.
Commercial.
No, but I think you raise a very, very good point, which is that sometimes in heavy metal we seem to worship a certain type of behavior or attitude that it's artificial.
And so but I also think, on the other hand, people like fantasy, and I don't know if one should go far out of your way to just, you know, be like, it's all smoke and mirrors. You see, all the things that you love because your job doesn't afford you that fantasy. It's all bullshit. You know, I think that there's a lot of people I think that know it's bullshit, but they just don't. They want to believe it's not bullshit, and I think
it's like wrestling, right?
maybe, However, yes, I do feel though that when people have said to me, "Hey, that's not metal," I'm like, dude, you know what? When I was younger, I maybe had something invested in being metal, right? 'Cause I loved metal. I still love metal. But what has happened over the years is that metal has become a part of what I do. It's not the thing that I do. So, and I've said this to a lot of people, if my quotient of heavy metal cred doesn't qualify me to be part of the club, then I'm fine with that. Like, you know, if I can't be part of the metal club because I do other things as well, then I just would ask the metal community at large just to sort of disqualify me for being part of the group. You know what I mean? Because then they don't have to worry about it, and I'm certainly not going to worry about it. And a lot of times, there's some artists I find that are just like, well, I'm not metal anymore. I don't do metal anymore. Now we do Radiohead type stuff or whatever. And I'm like, well, every now and then I do metal. Of course, I love metal. But not all the time. It's like eating steak for breakfast, man. It's like I only want to have it every now and then, right?
But do you think that having been labeled, categorized as metal, do you think that in one way or another that has been limiting as to the way you are perceived, because it also determines where you're going to be booked?
No, that's a good point. It's limiting, I think. This is a strange thing to say, but I believe it. I think it's limiting if you've never failed. If you've always been successful as a heavy metal musician, like since your first record, and there's a couple of instances of this with peers of mine who, I won't cite here just because, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. Not even throw them under the bus, but I just don't want to embarrass them. But they've been successful since the beginning. They've never had a failure. It's like since minute one, people thought they were awesome. And then they're awesome, 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 awesome. It would be much harder for a band like that to be like, you know what? I'm kind of tired of playing metal. I'm going to do something different now. And our next record is not metal. For me, man, my career's been like bananas. It's like I started with Steve Vai, and then I was in like Wild Hearts, and then I did Strapping, and then Ocean Machine, and Punky Brewster, and Casualties of Cool, and Terry, and Infinity, and everything's been all over the place. That unless you look at what I do in general as being one thing, that if I stray from that, there's going to be problems. You'd be hard pressed to sort of put me into a specific category. And so I don't find it limiting for me at all, because I've never really been involved with any particular club. It's not like I've been part of I was in the death metal club, or even with Strapping, dude. It's like Strapping was this weird anomaly. We were out with Napalm Death and Nile and all that shit, but it was not like we were part of that scene, right?
But does that labeling as a heavy metal musician affect your opportunities career-wise?
Yeah, that does. You're right. Sorry, I misinterpreted. Yeah, I view being a heavy metal musician like being a porn actor and then trying to get a job at Hollywood. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
You're like, hey, I've studied Shakespeare and I really want to get this part. And it's like, oh yeah, you're in Dick Slingers 4, I see, right?
I can personally relate to that category because I was actually in Dick Slingers 3. So
that was you?
That was me. Yeah, there were dicks everywhere. You might have not remembered me for that.
But you know what I mean? It's like to be even now, dude, I got acquaintances. I wouldn't call them friends necessarily. They keep going back to the heavy metal thing whenever they feel like threatened by what I do. It's like maybe they haven't, for whatever reason. Why would I say threatened? Sometimes people begrudge others of success in any way. And I've got certain people that I've grown up with that thankfully I'm not really in contact with that much anymore, who would always say, well, that's just because it's heavy metal. It's not that I put in the legwork. It's not that I did that. It's just because the genre is just so niche and so inconsequential that having success in that is almost like it doesn't matter. When I was younger, I used to get all bent out of shape about it because it would always come back to like, hey man, so what are you doing now? You're doing stuff more like Motley Crue or whatever? And I'm like, dude, what do you mean Motley Crue? Dude, it's fucking 2018. Motley Crue, is that where your reference point lies? That's what you think of heavy metal? I'm like, dude, I have like a 48-year-old dad it's an aesthetic as part of what I do creatively. And so I think that, and it was really funny because I did an interview with the Canadian Broadcasting Company as well. And it was interesting because the guy there wanted to do a interview about how heavy metal relates to classical music. And I was like, oh, this makes sense, because I certainly see like parallels between a lot of how, you know, Wagner or Stravinsky or all these things structure dissonance and all this, and how it plays in, and how there's a similarity to heavy metal. And I thought, well, I'm really interested in talking to this guy because it can lend some sort of credence to this type of music as being legitimate, as opposed to just this like Motley Crue backpatch sort of like anomaly. But the guy, dude, as soon as I got on the phone with him, he was so convinced that that's a type. So when you're out there with groupies and you're biting the heads off bats, and I'm just like, you know what I mean? I'm like, well, actually, you know what I mean? And then by the end, I was like, yeah, dude, that's totally what I do. I'm like, it's groupies all the time. It's cocaine. It's like, you know, but I got off the phone and I was just pissed. I'm thinking, fuck, man. It's like, you know, I really think that this type of music is a way to represent emotions that no other type of music can. You can get to depths with this, specifically if it's used as an accent. You know, if you've got something that's like reasonably melodic, and then in the middle of it, you're just like, bah! It can be jarring to the point where you can really put across your point. And if you're well versed in it as an art form, man, you can wield it as a tool. But so when I got off of this call, I was pissed off because I'm thinking, you know, it's that old thing about Venom patches and Motley Crue and Metallica, and we're all, you know, dope smoking fiends or whatever. And so I turned on the TV, and the first thing I saw was a Subway commercial that came out of a heavy metal band riding a cookie. And they were all like, heavy metal! And they got flying E's and, you know, like bangs and all this shit. And I'm like, maybe he's right. You know?
When you were growing up, there must have been something that hit you for whatever it was that, for example, in my case, just to kind of create a parallel, I lost my dad when I was fairly young. I was 14. And discovering heavy metal music and finding kind of this aggression and sometimes this verbalizing of depression, that was very cathartic. And it appeared to my greatest eternal shame with Marilyn Manson at the beginning, and then with other more traditional heavy metal bands. What was the thing that clicked with you at the beginning?
Motorhead. Yeah, the song Motorhead from Live at Brixton by Motorhead. That, and I guess Victim of Change is by Judas Priest off Unleashed in the East. And I don't even know what it was about it. You know, I've always drawn parallels to my environment when I listen to music. Like a song reminds me of a rainy day, or a song reminds me of a sunny day, or something like that. And those ones reminded me of something that I couldn't put my finger on, but I felt I was really drawn to, or I knew on some level. And it had something to do with rain. And I felt like a draw and a pull towards that in a way that was primal in a sense. And even to this day, it's funny now that people even consider me like a prog musician, because when I was growing up, I liked prog rock, maybe. I liked Yes and things like this. But most of that music actually irritated me because it lacked what Motorhead had, which was just visceral, like momentum. I love that power of it. And even now it's like, you know, people say, oh, have you heard this prog band, or, you know, this great prog song? And I think, God, it doesn't do anything for me. It's mind as opposed to stomach in a lot of ways. And so I was drawn from the very beginning to really visceral stuff. And maybe that started from Star Wars. Going back to that, I had the Star Wars soundtrack, and I just remember thinking, oh yeah, Darth Vader's theme, that's heavy as shit. So when I heard music that was like that, I was like, oh yeah, I know exactly what that is. That's Darth Vader right there, right? I firmly believe that a lot of what draws people to heavy metal or heavy music is being very sensitive. And I think that's in opposition to what people perceive it as. I think they see heavy metal and like the intensity of it, and they think, well, these people are just closed off. And maybe to some degree, there's a certain portion of the heavy music audience that's closed off and requires that level of intensity to break through so they feel something. But I think on the other side of that same coin is folks like myself who I feel really sensitive, really, really sensitive. And that type of music is the closest I can get to explaining how I feel, you know? But ultimately now at this age, it's a part of it. It's like music is just a language, and knowing how to speak heavy metal, I think, is a great attribute to anybody.
20-minute interview has lasted for an hour. So thank you so much for being so kind, tolerant, and for completely ignoring the fact that we have failed to promote Order of Magnitude Empath Live Volume 1, which comes out on October 23.
Go watch it on YouTube or something.
Ziltoid out. Eat poop.